Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode. Last night I tried to record this episode and unfortunately I had made the mistake of coughing really loudly and my voice had broken a bit and it's still a bit crackly, but I thought about sharing the episode at least. You know, I was thinking about the collective states of, let's say, humanization and individual states of humanization. What do I mean by this? I mean, I was thinking about what sort of relationship does the human being have with the world that it is in. And, you know, this specific episode, the title, "Our Monarchy is Natural," is that, I'm going to share something. This episode, I guess, is personal to me. I was born in Iran. And raised later on in Canada. And I don't know if people know this about Iran, but Iran used to have a monarchy. And now it doesn't. This is like really old news, but but honestly, I was thinking about the idea of a monarchy. When I say the royalty of nature, I'm writing a book called Civilization 2.0, where I am giving a new attitude, new approach to this idea of monarchy in the sense of the human kingdom. But yesterday, when I was inspired to share this episode, I was thinking about this idea that is a monarchy natural? You know, if you look at human history, if I would say it, pretty much the ancient world had, on some level, naturally through the development of human ego and whatnot, come into a sort of monarchical position. Pretty much empires back in the day, each considered, like, empires had huge egos. Now nations are more compassionate to one another. Pretty much, I was thinking, okay, aside from the ego of the king and the queen, like, is a monarchy natural? And then I thought about, what if it is natural? What if, for example, you look at bees and you look at ants and they have a sort of monarchy? You know, it's known, there's this known fact about beehives that if you change the queen of the beehive, let's say that you have two different beehives and you change each other's queens, like you replace each other's queens, the beehive will attack the imposter queen, right? It's as if like they have a sort of honor. So I was like, wait a minute, you know, out of all the governmental structures that we human beings have thought of, right, a monarchy seems to be one in nature. You know, so nature has a sort of hierarchical, you know, structure it develops into. And so, as bizarre as this may sound, I thought if monarchies are natural, could it be that democracy is unnatural? And then I thought about the human design, and I realized the human intelligence is the closest thing to alien life on Earth. We are so different than all the other species on this planet, where it's almost as if our intuitions, could shout, they'd be like you're from elsewhere. The royalty of nature. When I was born in 1991, I was born in Tehran, Iran, and the government was a theocracy. And you know what's hilarious? When I was looking at the evolution of the history of the country of Iran, it was like as if from the idea of an external king, the country moved to the idea of an internal king. So that is on some level what religion is. I feel that, maybe if there's certain religious people, they could share their experiences in the chat section. But I feel that sort of relationship we would see. Imagine you were a villager back in the day and the kingdom had a king. And so imagine like a villager boy suddenly seeing like the king's entourage coming down like a road. There was a presence, there was this idea that in order for a human being to feel honorable, you know what it is? It's like I feel a bunch of I shouldn't say European, but it's like some of the last kings recorded in history were not great kings. And it's like a bunch of kings that were not great, ruined the idea, of a kingdom for modernity. And it's also human nature. Back in the day, people were powerless, But now, we can say people Sorry, guys, my voice is a bit in a difficult position this episode. I'll just go as far as I can, and then if it's too bothersome for me, I'll end it. To reorganize my thoughts in this moment. Pretty much imagine someone looking at an anthill being like, okay, ants don't have sophisticated brains like human beings, so there seems to be some innate natural structuring by nature when it comes to a monarchy. Now, human beings used to have monarchies, and the idea changed, and now I would say if there's a king that people are serving, it's most likely the concept of God, the concept of this archetype that is pretty much not just that which is watching over the whole kingdom of manifestation, but also that which owns it, you know. And so I feel when I said earlier maybe religious people can share, I was pointing to this idea that it's like as a person serves a king. When I look at religious people, to me I feel that is what they're trying to embody. They're trying to be servants of an inconceivable origin, servants of an beyond conception power. So it's like this, I'm kind of getting clues that, okay, in the outer realms, nature structures itself. And when we look at the human mind now, it also has a sort of, you know, when it comes to its faith in the unknown, it has a sort of relationship with authority. And, you know, authority is one of those concepts which has a transcendental meaning. To wonder about the supreme source of movement in the moment. We can even consider the recognition of authority. Was like an evolutionary advancement. Pretty much the human being had a capability to recognizing its world, recognizing itself, recognizing others similar to itself. And pretty much it's just the idea of leadership. You know, moments in nature require leadership. Every let's say lions, there's sort of like the head lion of the pride. There's like the alpha wolf of the pack. Pretty much human beings, if they had a spectrum of power, they have gone to a point where it's as if the top of the spectrum, top of the hierarchy, has been the context setter. I was talking to my brother. I have a twin brother, and I was telling him that if there was a king, like if I may, let's say if it was a past life, or even if something of the sort now, if there was a king, and let's say there was an honest, righteous, and incredible human being as a sort of beacon of a king or a queen. It's like a part of me felt that it's like similar to how we have an airplane and there's a pilot. It's as if the passengers, whether they know it or not, deep down care for the pilot, right? So similarly, kingdoms would care for their kings, but it depended on the piloting of the pilot, right? If the king was cruel, karma would devour him. If the king was kind, let's say at least the world had something to look at. So pretty much just this episode, I guess with the voice I have now, with the strength of my voice in this episode, I would say that to me, the human species requires to function in the modality of a kingdom. Now, I thought about, okay, how do we deal with this problem of like ignorant kings, cruel kings, like messed up kings? Like, how do we live in a sort of modern kingdom where we don't have issues with like a king, right? A king, somebody having way too much power. I mean, honestly, in today's world, the richest people are they're like living like kings, But for me, I thought the only way that this could work is that if we considered the crown not on the head of a person, but on the head of a principle or the head of an idea, right? So I thought about what sort of, because in a lot of these episodes, I'm pretty much this guy where it's been my side hobby for a decade in wondering how an advanced civilization will look and how humanity can even access it. So I came up with this idea, with this view that I'm like, okay, human beings in modern society, there's certain dimensions they're lacking. We lack trust, we lack honor, we lack loyalty. And when I say we lack these, not to, let's say, an individual being loyal to another individual, I'm talking about a species being loyal and honorable and trusting the efforts of the whole species, right? It's like everybody trusting everybody's victory, everybody's greatness. It's like, imagine there's this one person, he reaches a sort of great state of mind, then he's like, wait a minute, what about the world? And so it's as if now I am someone wondering, what would 8 billion actualizations of greatness look like? So I thought about the only way that human beings cannot fight over a king, and at the same time, if there is a king, what tends to happen? Usually, there's a cruel, it's like the king could get backstabbed. The king, there's so many things, so many factors that it's like the archetype could be attacked, right? The position could be attacked. So I thought about, okay, what if the king, what if like the honor, the trust and the loyalty, and the respect that the species is lacking, what if the species decided that the future generations, the idea of people in the future, that's where the crown is, right? What I'm trying to say is that if there was something to put a crown on, it would be the future generations. So it would be as if each generation, pretty much it's this idea that every human being that is alive is a servant of the potential of the future generations, right? Because really the human species has come to a point where, I guess this is from my own corner of the universe kind of perspective, but in my own life and also observing, thanks to the internet, the lives of others, I have come to this conclusion that a human being does not feel satisfied only through survival. Survival is like getting able to go inside an airplane, but it's as if what comes beyond survival is actually the flight beyond, right? In history, we have had examples of kind of like messed up kings in which if somebody, like back in the day, if a villager like walked in the shadow of the king, he would get executed. It's as if you weren't even allowed to step on the king's shadow, and pretty much it's like when it comes to power, there's two modes. There's control through fear, and then there's control through love. Let's say there's some parents who love their children, and the child listens in the recognition of that love. And let's say there's some children who fear their parents, and the child listens in accordance to that. Some part of me, I don't know, ever since just noticing, it was yesterday, I was sitting on this park bench, and I was just, in a pleasant moment, and for a second I was like, no way, like ants and bees have kingdoms. And I looked at the modern times, and I thought about sure, we could have this attitude like nations or kind of like kingdoms, but I thought about, we have like the mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, and I guess the human kingdom would be like the best sort of approach to it. I wouldn't mind, opening my eyes in a world where, imagine something great is done on the planet, and then it's like those people who are announcing that great thing, whether an invention or event or some sort of act of progress. It's as if in the honor of the advanced humanity, in the honor of the kingdom of the human species, the effort of the survival of our ancestors and the survival of ourselves has led. There has been moments where, sometimes I would say I'm a very serious person, and my emotions feel like sometimes when I experience emotions, I feel like it's as if I'm like, just like Skyrim, an arrow in the knee kind of moment, as if like I'm being shot by an emotion in the moment. But there are moments where I look at this world and I ask myself, am I enough for the source of my own meaning? And usually mystical traditions and whatnot kind of provide that. If I was a solipsist, there would be no reason of talking about an advanced civilization. If I just felt that, the mind was the only reality, then in some sense there would be no regard for the evolution of a shape. Right? For me, as someone who's looked into these ancient mystical traditions, I came to the conclusion that to release oneself out of the dream-like state of the world, or some sorrow or a simulation, the simulation of reality is kept through shape. So in other words, if a human being wants to transcend the suffering or the karmic structure of reality, they have to stop identifying with shape, because a shape engages reality. And at the same time, the world is a shape. In my own playful imaginings of who I could have been in a past life, there has been times where I have fathomed as if like, was I like, maybe the general of a kingdom? Something of that sort. To me, it's like there's a, untapped dimension of honor, and when I tap into it, something changes. Like the command and the authority of my voice changes. We are conditioned to think that the meaning of our human lives is limited from the beginning of our birth to its death, right? Like right now, typically if somebody goes to a human being and says, hey, human being, who are you? The human being's like, yeah, I was born this time, I went through these experiences, and pretty much it's a sequence of memory, sequence of memories, extractions from the beginning of birth, right? But I thought about it differently, and I was like, wait a minute. What if the meaning of this life surpasses the humanized ability to receive it from just the beginning of life? Scholars say there's two worlds here. There's a world where, from the beginning of the world it starts from the beginning of your birth to your death, and then there's a world that was here before you were born, and there's a world that will be here after we die. So technically there are two worlds. Every human being is existing in two worlds, but we are so captured by our immediate life, the life from the beginning of our birth to our death, that we forget about the significance of beyond it, right? It's as if when you look at a lot of these billionaires, trillionaires who go into philanthropy, it's as if they became billionaires and trillionaires first. Then something more came into the picture. For me, as someone who's been talking a lot, sometimes I hilariously think like a part of me feels like I have, after this lifetime, probably I don't have anything to deal with manifestation. Actually, some part of me feels like I've seen shapes enough for this lifetime. When I reach its end, I think so there's moments where I fathom, like, what's gonna be my post-death experience. And I've had this feeling, in my dreams I've died, Like I've died a couple times in my dreams. And usually what happens in the dream state when I die is that I linger as a presence of attention. That means right now, we human beings are identifying with the shape of the moment. We don't realize from the beginning of our life till now, there has been an attributeless viewing dimension to our being. So when the body goes away, the viewer, the unknown viewer remains, at least in dream states. In my experience, it was like that, right? But there's been moments where I felt like, okay, in this life, if my body is no longer a factor to consider, then it would be left with the mind, and the mind's desire. Imagine these are dimensions. So imagine there's a dimension of body, there's a dimension of mind, and let's say there's a dimension of soul. For the dimension of soul, I call that the inconceivable dimension. For the mind, an invisible dimension. For the body, a visible dimension. Pretty much, it's like death is another way where, whether we like it or not, we will renounce our visible physical dimension. The mind doesn't die, but the mind can be released. So imagine like the body dies, whether we choose it or not. It's like there will be a sort of poetic exit from, substancehood, right? But imagehood is something else, right? And so for an image, for a person to, let's say, transcend an image, the idea is that there has to come a release. So imagine, or I'll use myself as an example. Imagine my free will is a sort of king, and my body is one of its servants. Or let's say poetically, my soul is a sort of king of my moment, and my body is like a servant, and my mind is also, let's say, a more elevated servant of my being. So it's as if death is another way of saying the king has to let go. Or I could say it a better way. We can say the body is the kingdom. The mind is like the servants of the king. And the soul or free will is the king archetype. So when death comes, it's as if the kingdom will go out of the picture. So it will be a king with only his servants. And then the mind, it's as if the king has to release the servants, or the servants will go on looking for, another kingdom to build. There's something strange about this world, where at first I thought it was analysis. It was something that we had to figure out about it. It was something based on, let's say, intellectual understanding. But then I realized the more a person intellectually understands something, the more they are actually separating the world from an instantaneity of being. So it's as if we're not in this planet, we're not on this planet to understand it, on the level, or let me say it, to analyze it, because it is too big. The cosmos is too big. right? Reality has unknown variables. The bigger the picture becomes, right? It's like, what is consciousness? It is a candle glow in a dark room, and it's as if this candle glow is getting brighter and brighter and brighter, right? Until it suddenly, the wick of the candle melts, and eventually it will vanish, right? So on some level, it's as if consciousness is an experience extractor out of manifest shape. Or poetically, consciousness is here to accumulate experience, but not to process the experience. I'm going to share with the viewers an experience I had. This happened to me in Turkey. In Istanbul, Turkey. I had a chance, I was visiting there. It was me and others, but there was a time where I just went for just a walk alone, in the evening. And I remember I went to this I went for a walk, and then I went to this shopping mall, and then I had a taxi to go to the shopping mall. When I came out of the shopping mall, that was when I was like looking for a taxi and I couldn't find it. I would try, and it's like the taxis would be taken. And I remember I just went to this park and I was having a cigarette, and I started to poetically tune into my inner radio and hear a sort of, sequence of sentences in my inner realms. And in my inner realms, I heard this sequence that literally, it was like this, poetically, the logos of my intuition was telling me, give a command that you want a taxi and count to 20. And my intuition told me to go stand somewhere specific. That means that when I say my intuition told me, I don't know, I think others may have this ability. But for me, there's moments where, like, wherever I go, I can see myself. Like, let's say if I want to sit on a chair, I see myself already sitting there, and I just go sit there. So this was one of those moments where I had this kind of like intuitive instruction. I was in this park, and there was a street, and I was tired, and I just say, in some sense, I give this command. It was like the first time in my life where I was like, being like, okay, like this thing happened now, right? So I gave a command as if like a taxi happened here. I go by the center, by the street, and my intuition's telling me count to 20, and I count to 20. And when I get to the number 20, a taxi pulls in and just comes there. And I remember I had goosebumps the whole ride. It was strangely this thing where it was as if my free will felt able for a moment in its authority. But in reality, whatever happens, whatever we get, even Alexander the Great knew this, because when Alexander the Great died, there was a tradition where they would put the person's body on a boat, and they would burn the boat and send the boat to the ship, and usually the person's arms would be crossed. But for Alexander the Great, he had given this instruction for his arms to be open. In other words, an empty-handedness. We all leave empty-handed. And so the dimension of honor, loyalty, and trust that is missing in civilization 1.0, as I call this modernity of ours, It's like a way to use the lifetime from the beginning of our birth to its death in honor of the world before we were born and the world that will be here after we die. Pretty much, I guess, in this episode I'm saying I am considering a possible monarchy for human civilization, for the human kingdom. And the way it's possible is that the crown is on the head of the future. So the future is the king, and the present is the servant. The present and the past are serving the future, whether we are conscious of it or not. You know, the other day, I asked myself a question, two questions. One was, what do I want? And the other was that, what do I love? And you know, sometimes in human psychology, a person hasn't thought about something and it's just like, you know, has an emotional emotion replacing it. Let's say a certain thought, that means it's like the person hasn't, you know, consciously looked at something, but is unconsciously using an emotion to fill out, let's say, that conscious gap. And you know, I'm talking about those two questions more than just like the basic answers, right? For me, I constantly have this feeling, you know, it's like one of my mantras where I'm like, okay, 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere, 8 billion human beings on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Constantly think about this, you know. And I realized human life, in its acknowledgement of greater dimensions of life, does not seek to access these dimensions, but, let's say, access and serve through them. What is missing from the species is a very sophisticated relationship of serving the realm. And we have this idea that serving ourselves is enough, you know. Imagine you were a human being and let's say some human being's consciousness was transferred into an ant. And imagine there was an ant in an anthill that had this memories of like being a human, right? It's as if that ant in that ant universe would have like how would I say it? Perhaps what really intuition is the remembrance of how we have served greater worlds before we were born. A part of me feels like, you know, I deem myself worthy to attempt to see how can we solve this collective problem. And then there's a part of me who feels like, I am too insignificant to even consider the significance. Life is fascinating. It's like, not only is there an ideological roller coaster, not only is there a physical roller coaster, but there's also an emotional roller coaster. It's like we're on 3 roller coasters at the same time. Or maybe this idea of a monarchy, it's just a dimensional truth. That means it's like some part of how like the world is structured. Let's say the body has a king, the mind has a king, and poetically the soul has a king. Or let's say it's in some sense, the king for the body is like the physical representation of some sort of monarchical system. Let's say the king for the mind is the idea of God. And let's say the king for the soul is an inconceivable presence. You see, when I talk about body, mind, soul, the soul to me is 100% unknown. The body is 100% known. The mind is semi-known, like 50% unknown, 50% known, just for the sake of giving it a power. I've wondered beyond physiological survival. Like, let's say we were a species of immortal humans. Imagine all human beings were powerful and all human beings couldn't die. And we wanted some sort of measure of like, okay, who would be a worthy king? It would most likely be based on attitude. Then we ask ourselves, where does attitude come from? Attitude comes from the context of vision somebody holds. It's another way of saying the type of self you are is based on the type of world you see. And I don't know, maybe the future generations, if these talks, get to them, they might be wondering, like, what is Mr. Within serving? And there was a time I thought, could it be myself? Am I serving myself? And then I thought, okay, could I be serving like the species? Then I thought, okay, could I be serving God? And I came to this realization that on some level, it's like, think of it as a language, and think of it, there's a language of visible language, like a physical language, and then there's a language of mind, which is pretty much like the type of thoughts that come and go. And imagine there's an emotional language. One of my biggest realizations of 2022 has been that what has been moving my life force it's starting from an emotion. And perhaps it's like the feeling suggests the ability, There's been many moments in my life where I would poetically say I have been my psychology's been close to the edge of madness. And there's this quote from Rumi. This quote has like saved my life, honestly, when I think about it. There's a quote from Rumi where he says, before death takes away all that is given, give away all there is to give. It's as if we are this sort of intelligence, this conscious intelligence that knows that what it is, or a part of what it is going to go away. And it's as if, imagine like you are like a painter, and you have the brush in your hand for like 100 years. And in these 100 years, you can use the brush, you can use the paint of the mind, and you can draw a picture, right? And so I feel that's the idea. That's the honor of the kingdom of humanity. Once we have successfully managed the individual dimension, we will wonder about the efficiency of the collective dimension. And until we manifest the efficiency of the collective dimension, we will not feel free. Sometimes a person can think that a good strategy to life is that in anything you do, you max out your effort, because once you max out your effort, it's as if you did all you were capable, right? I remember being a kid raised in a theocratical society. It's as if Iran's a country that, because religion is mixed in the politics, people learn religion from the moment they're born. But they're not conditioned by religion to a degree where it's like nothing else. But what I'm trying to say is religion through politics kind of like becomes solidified in culture. Why are the eyes here? And why is the energy or the life force of the free will here? Isn't it strange to be alive in a world that one can die in, and the whole species forgets this notion, We allow our emotions to conquer us because we don't realize our position physically is temporary. People suffer because they can't acknowledge that existence is conditional. There has been some nights where I have technically kind of prayed and at the same time cried for my soul. I have wondered, what have I done that I have manifested in a realm where there is an invitation for endless beginnings, yet it ends. It's like we get to feel as a finite entity infinite for a little while. Right now, species doesn't acknowledge it, but to serve the human kingdom is a great honor. It's bizarre situation, existential situation, but at the same time, it's a great honor. It's as if, like, sometimes I wonder what's the purpose of being conscious of the world. Why did we evolve for 4.5 billion years just to notice our suffering and our death before it happens? To notice the end. This is really what comes with consciousness. And because we have an ability to acknowledge the end, we can revalue or reset the value of the present. When I look at birds and squirrels, they're not trying to build advanced civilizations. Only, like, let's say in the insect kingdom, in regards to ants and bees, sure, like the beehive is like their kingdom, right? Strangely, ants and bees are like, the most honorable insects. And it's very easy to not care when we have the ability to ignore. The birds and squirrels seem content in their limited awareness. It is mankind. There is something about the spirit that moves humanity, that it is not content. That means it's as if, like, it's like, just like there's an urge of survival, this urge of survival could be more transcendental than we believe. It's as if obstacles arose, challenges arose, and consciousness is literally a response. human consciousness is pretty much an unknown ability to respond to a known world. This episode, I wish my voice was a bit more like there's a slight discomfort when I speak, so I wish that discomfort wasn't here. But I'll make this part one. I feel there's so much more to say about this topic. I'll just end off with reading some quotes. So, Pietro Aretino, I am indeed a king, because I know how to rule myself. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, he is happiest, be he king or peasant, who finds peace in his home. Desiderius Erasmus, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Jack Hanna, a lion is called a king of beasts, obviously for a reason. Buddha, I was born into the world as the king of truth for the salvation of the world. King Solomon, kindness and faithfulness keep a king safe. Through kindness his throne is made secure. Alfred Lord Tennyson, authority forgets a dying king. Thomas More, I die the king's faithful servant, but God's first. Francis of Assisi, I am the herald of the great king. James Monroe, a king without power is an absurdity. Helen Keller, there is no king who has not had a slave among his ancestors, and no slave who has not had a king among his. The Dalai Lama, world belongs to humanity, not this leader, or that king or prince or religious leader. World belongs to humanity. Exactly, this is why the only sort of monarchy is the human kingdom that can be entertained. Everything else has like a bit of its own ethnocentric prejudice. Sallust, Sallust. He says, neither soldiers nor money can defend a king, but only friends won by good deeds, merit, and honesty. Nostradamus, the year 1999, 7th month. From heaven will come a great king of terror to bring back to life the great king of Anglemois. Before and after Mars to reign by good luck. Okay, I've no idea what to make of that. Maximilian Robespierre, the king must die so that the country can live. Exactly, but if the king is the future generations, if the king dies, there is no country to live. If the future generations lose or miss out on their potential of greatness, it's as if the fools of the past and the fools of the present denied the vision of the future, denied, the greatness of the future. That's really it. I mean, what is, like, we're on a planet, human beings popping out of nowhere. There's so many human beings that die and are born every day. It's as if we are it's like, just because our eyes are starting in our body, like first person point of view, so because our sight is starting from our eyes, we don't consider it. But imagine at the same time a person had, like, let's say, first person point of view sight from their biological eyes. Imagine you simultaneously had sight as the sky or from an aerial view. It's really because of our perception where our limitations contain us. Pericles, time is the king of all men. He is their parent and their grave, and gives them what he will and not what they crave. Chanakya, the serpent, the king, the tiger, the stinging wasp, the small child, the dog owned by other people, and the fool. These seven ought not to be awakened from sleep. Muhammad Ali, I'm the greatest thing that ever lived. I'm the king of the world. I'm a bad man. I'm the prettiest thing that ever lived. Rumi, I have seen the king with a face of glory, he who is the eye and the sun of heaven, he who is the companion and healer of all beings, he who is the soul and the universe that births souls. Wow. Edward 8. I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love. Pierre Corneille. A true king is neither a husband nor father. He considers his throne and nothing else. I feel that's not the best view of a king. A king is someone who is feeling responsible for the kingdom. Right now, human beings, they feel responsible to their nations, but imagine you felt responsible for the universal sector. Imagine you're not just a small human being that's named itself in the void. Imagine there's a sort of multidimensional hierarchy. Just like human beings look at ants, imagine there are greater beings that look at human beings, and there's even a greater being that looks at all of them. It's as if in the hierarchy of the royalty of how intelligence moves at all. I think the greatest kings are servants of the collective. Pretty much a king is an archetype of someone who serves a collective. And somebody who serves an individual. It's easy to be a king of your own world, but to wonder about how can we serve the kingdom of all worlds. It really is, as far as consciousness is concerned, right? We are all serving the kingdom of intelligence. There's an intelligence here. Life is an intelligent event. Thomas Hardy. Aspect are within us, and who seems most kingly is king. Okay. William F. Buckley Jr. It is not a sign of arrogance for the king to rule. That is what he is there for. Louis XVIII of France says a king should die on his feet. Thiruvalluvar. The enemies cannot destroy the king who has at his service the respect and friendship of the wise men who can find fault, disagree, and correct him. You know, there is this idea of worthiness, and I feel karma is here to show us our collective worth. The future generations, whether we know it or not, we are living for them. Why? Because we are a film that will finish, and they are a film that they will, hopefully, if the species is smart, wise, and efficient, pretty much the human kingdom will not be sieged by time. The species needs a collective ethos. If a person identifies as, like, I'll say it this way, if there's a human archetype, or here, I'll just say this. If we make the greatest potential of the species a sort of kingly archetype, and we all serve the potential of our species, no amount of terrible history can limit us. I'll end this episode by saying that it's part 1. Maybe in the future I'll leave it part 2. But whoever you are, thanks for listening. And I have a hope that my voice will recover. I feel it's too soon for me to enter silence. Inevitably, we all will, though. And I guess the healthiest thing that a person can say about life is that it is an opportunity to be something in the void. And once we are, we seek the collective position. It's like the ant has an individual, like the instincts are there to help us function as an individual, but the intuition is there to help us function as a collective. If human beings start listening to their intuition, I think the same ways that bees build a beehive, it will be the same way where an advanced human kingdom will arise, right? And imagine the honor. Just imagine the honor if extraterrestrials invade in the future. The kingdom of humanity is one great kingdom. Do you know we will defend the human kingdom, right? Whatever forces, let's say if there's like technological invasion, extraterrestrial invasion, whatever sort of invasion, it's like the honor of the species. That is what's missing. And if this is activated, I will tell you, I think the kindest and greatest human beings will awaken in the service of something that is greater than them. And physically, it's our species. I understand people, religious people serving God, and God is an inconceivable origin. But if one was to serve the inconceivable, the future fits the description as well. Perhaps our eyes are open for us to realize they were never closed, that there's a deeper dimension where we as beings are universal beings. We are responsible for the universal sector on a level beyond our human archetype. And so when universal beings honor the universal sector, it's as if caring for the future generations is caring for the destiny of this part of the universe. With great honor comes the great ability to actualize greatness. So whoever you are listening to me, let's say you're someone who feels dishonored individually. You cannot be dishonored by the collective potential of the species because it hasn't happened yet. The cool thing about the future wearing the crown, the future generations being the kings of the living, is that the cruelty of them is the cruelty of ourselves to ourselves. And the kindness of them is the kindness of ourselves to ourselves. In the honor of the greatness of this universe's, this moment's life force, the life force of existence. You know, there may be people who may be like, Mr.Within, you know, why are you talking about an advanced humanity? Why are you talking about an advanced civilization? You know, just forget about the future and just, you know, be a turtle in your own shell of the present, you know. But if we are a person, if we have any love, any sort of love for anything that exists in the present, how can we not love its future? You know, imagine falling in love. I think maybe this is a hilarious distinction, you know, between men and women, right? That men fall in love with what they see in the present. And perhaps women fall in love with, you know, the future of what they see in the present, you know. Who knows? The species has to become content with the unknown. It has to honor the potential of what it can know. And so it's as if in the honor of all existence that can be experienced, the experience serves the whole moment. If in the future we all reach a point where we are a collective being, to care for individualism, it's as if living for the future is like living for everything that is being before we do anything. If the future reaches a collective state of being. And think of it, you know, that we have like our lifetime to not just, you know, it's as if like the purpose of consciousness is to discover its greatest value. And I find that that greatest value goes beyond conception. We are in a phase of nature where we are visible organisms in a visible world. And the free will hilariously is like an invisible momentum to the visible life, an invisible force generation. And let's just consider that every human being that's alive just lived in the greatest way. Let's say for a second we try to visualize, okay, we have an advanced civilization, every human being has an advanced honor, everything's actualized. It's as if greatness is actualized. That's when I would say the satisfaction of the true kingdom of existence comes, right? Ultimately, human beings seek something, but what they seek, if they find it, its result would be contentment. And so it's this strange thing that if we were truly free, we wouldn't need to do anything. It is the absence of our freedom, right? So it's this idea like when the king becomes king, its physical life reduces in the sense that the king is not the one doing the things, like let's say those in the kingdom do it for the king. And honestly, right now, as I'm giving this talk, I'm just thinking like, okay, what part of my intelligence can represent a kingly archetype? And it's honestly like my mind. It's like hilariously my mind. It's like this. It's like my invisible mind is the king of my visible body, and my inconceivable soul is the king of my visible mind. So it's this another way of saying the inconceivable is invisibly being visible, and then from a visible position it's wondering what invisible thing could it do to serve the inconceivable. Life is poetically like a three-dimensional hero's journey, where it starts from the inconceivable, goes to the invisible, goes to the visible, and then from the visible journeys back to the invisible, and from the invisible journeys back to the inconceivable. If the mind continues after death, it would be a suggestion that the visible reality was taking place in an invisible one. Now, it's like this thing where, let's say a person wants to renounce manifestation on a heavily, or let's say intensely mystical level. So the person's like, okay, if I want to renounce a world that is made of illusion, I technically have to renounce the world that is true, which is keeping that illusion, because an illusion cannot exist on its own. Anybody who has ever thought of the idea of a simulation, it's like the simulation, where is it starting? Where is it happening in a non-simulated state? So it's the strange thing where an inconceivable truth is being an invisible free will of a visible world. And I don't know how this will serve humanity, but I feel for the first time in the recognition that there is nothing an inconceivable being can do to know it's inconceivable. It's as if pre-effort. Lao Tzu was onto something when he talked about the Tao. The real Tao is a Tao that cannot be spoken about. And at the same time, action through inaction. It's as if in order for us to experience spirituality, it's like hilariously like the effort of the body and the mind stop for a moment, and we notice how the background is, what's moving in the background of our being. And morality, it is sad. it is sad that the world is so big, the cosmos is so big, and the temper and the human life is so short, right? You know, it's like somebody raised in a religious perspective being like, oh, God put us on earth, you know, to answer for our sins, you know, but why did the God make the other planets? You know? Why is the world so big? Why? Why is it necessary for existence to be such a vast system? That means existence is made with a purpose that has nothing to do with existence. It's as if the intent of existence is beyond existence, which is another way of saying our existence has nothing to do with our experience, like the experiencer. It's another way of saying the body, there's like a visible world, an invisible world, and an inconceivable world, and hilariously they are independent from one another. And so it's like the human being is being like three types of beings at the same time, you know, and each of those beings are independent of the other. You know, sometimes I feel free will is like a needle with a string, and it's weaving, like it's like three, or how would I say it? It's like we're trying to like sew a scarf, knit a scarf with three different colors. Sometimes I think, is ideology a reaction to an emptiness? Could it be that the reason human beings have reasoned the value system is because on some level they know that because there is nothing, there can be something? This, you know what it is? I think I'm getting convinced that we say the world is pretty much matter and space, but I feel there's a third thing. There is a third dimension which our species either cannot name, it's inconceivable, or we haven't discovered it yet. There is a third thing. Our eyes do not deceive us, but they at the same time do not show us the full picture. Which is another way of saying the presence or instantaneous knowing of sight is not in sight. Our sight is not in sight. Or poetically, what is in our sight is the great insight. Its attention, reality, its origin is an unknown attention. We are unknown beings. We are the unknown. That means if I don't identify with my body, if with an object, if I don't identify with a subject, it's like, man, it's like my memories and my physical existence went out the picture. So who am I? We are the living unknown. That is the royalty of nature. It's recognition that before our known minds could interpret fragments of reality, there is a river of collective being, which is another way of saying that Earth is like the center of a grand coliseum of dimensions. I have this feeling that we are just like soccer players in the middle of a soccer game, and it's like we don't see the stands. We don't see, you know, the endless dimensions cheering for the advancement of humanity. Because what else is there to do in the void? I talk about an advanced civilization, and a part of me knows that every person on this planet in the outer realms will come to this conclusion. What is the best thing that just 8 billion creatures on a rock can do? Like, what is the purpose of the ant? Let's say we look at an ant and we're like, why is this ant alive, right? The ant is designed to serve the anthill. And perhaps the human being is designed to serve the human kingdom, but the evolution of the human kingdom is into a recognition that we have been multidimensional, not from the beginning, before our beginning. In the honor of the majesty of anything moving at all in this world, it's as if, there is something royal about consciousness, that it can recognize that it's in the kingdom of manifestation. There is a great honor in being a human being, and there is a greater honor in realizing the human being as the effort of humanity, the failure of an individual, the success of an individual. Our species should be let me tell you, it's like, imagine that day, imagine that moment in history where every human being is afraid of the failure of anybody. That means the might of the vision of humanity reaches a point. That means it's like, if we want to truly be advanced beings in an advanced humanity, or in an advanced civilization, do you know what kind of honor, what sort of sophisticated ego that would bring? The ego would be as if I am part of the most advanced civilization in the void, then every part of this civilization must be advanced. That means there is no longer weak and strong people. There is either a successful species or there isn't, right? Because who said that we are to be shackled in the past? The past is like a prototype. The present is an opportunity to build a new prototype, and update that prototype. Dear viewers, dear human beings alive in 2022, all your children, let's say your children's children, the great grandkids of all those people who are alive now, the world will be pushed into self-isolation until it realizes itself is present through everything. Individual consciousness is indirectly and subconsciously living for collective consciousness. When you look at human behavior, there's an urge for it to be acknowledged. It's as if the person's like, why am I working so hard, right? To be acknowledged by something. There are people who can't acknowledge themselves. They seek acknowledgement from others. There are people, who receive acknowledgement from others but can't receive acknowledgement from themselves. I feel one of the greatest strategies to bypass, or I should say to overcome or surpass, the fear of extinction is to accept the greatness of the system first. Because what are the options, right? If a single one of us fails, that means, imagine, we wanted to truly build an efficient civilization. It's either on a conceptual level or a contextual level. Why are we manifest? Why are we physical entities? It can't be individual oriented. Like if the purpose of life was just ourself, then we would be in a universe where there would be nothing else necessary. You know, it's like we're inside a multiplayer online game. Some games, there's this video game I've dabbled in sometimes, you know. This video game called League of Legends. In it, there's an option where you go on this map where there's multiple players, and then you have an option where it's called the training tool, the practice tool, where you just go into a single map and you're alone with yourself in that map, and you can do anything in that map pretty much, right? So it's this idea of solipsism, a person being like, it's my own universe, you know, my own universe is only true. It's like being in a map where there is no responsibility to another. You know, that's the danger of nihilism and solipsism. It's an escapism from our collective responsibility. Imagine, you know, the soul, or imagine poetically, like some unknown voice questioning the dimensions of the human being. It's as if in the moment suddenly the question comes, like, or imagine some voice, some unknown voice shouts at the body, "What king do you serve?" Shouts at the physical dimension. And the body says, "I serve the mind. I serve the mind king," you know? And then imagine that unknown voice shouts at the mind and says, "What king do you serve?" Right? And right now the mind thinks it is its own king. But the mind, in its recognition of its inferiority, will realize its superiority is found in its collective life. Part of me honestly feels like in past lives, poetically, even though I don't really entertain the idea, because who I see myself now is like an incomplete picture of life. But there's been times where I would say, and the arc I feel I have served royalty. And the greatest royalty to serve, the unknown voice shouts at the mind, "What king do you serve?" And the mind says, "I serve the soul king." And then the final question, the voice shouts at the soul, "What king do you serve?" And the soul poetically doesn't serve the body, doesn't serve the mind. The body and mind serve the soul. The soul is left to serve the inconceivable. The unknown is the evolution of our knowledge. So, dear viewers, the species has reached a point where it is not just realizing the origin of individualism is unknown. It is realizing an unknown body, an unknown mind, an unknown soul, poetically all being an unknown world. When I say we serve the future, the kings and queens of the future, we are serving the greatness of their potential. We are all living for the potential of the future generations. What else can we do? The past is past, the present is just here. The future is the privilege of the evolutionary opportunity, just to be able to consider the future. You know, a lot of new age gurus just say, come to the here and now, everybody. You forget your egos, but I feel the ego is the servant of the realm. It's as if, sometimes I feel life, we're not again here to analyze something. We're here to notice. We're here to notice something that we could not notice before. The eyes that sought freedom. The eyes that served freedom. It's as if the body gives its greatest gift. Or let's say, poetically, the soul is like a king, and the body brings it a gift, and the body's like, oh, inconceivable king, I gift you manifestation. It's as if our body is how existence is given a gift poetically to our inconceivable nature. And our mind, which really is a story. Everybody is a character in a story if we're talking, right? Like it's impossible to even speak without being a character in a story, because it's like, what context are the words in? It's like we're living for the freedom of greatness and we don't know it. We don't realize it. That's the thing about death, right? It's like the world telling you you're nothing. But the thing about life is it's as if life is telling you the world is everything. Yeah, it's like the sermon of life is everything. And the sermon of death is nothing. It's like a person wondering what death is, and then somebody who's been playing a multiplayer online video game suddenly gets tired of the video game or finishes the video game, and it's like, all right, I'm out of here. I want the listeners, this is going to be like think of this as an assignment, right? Whoever's listening, I want the viewers to go find a piece of paper and write an essay on what they consider ultimate freedom to me. And after you have written that essay, make a copy of it or take a picture of it with your phone or something and email it to yourself. And then after you have written that essay, I want you to burn the piece of paper and to realize that is the freedom of the inconceivable. Beyond the video game, there is something that has been playing it. That means beyond the idea of my name is Amin, beyond the online alias of Mr.Within, beyond any sort of worldly concept or context, the unknown player of life has logged into knowledge. And once its work is done with the known realm, with the knowable universe, an unknown freedom awaits. And even though I said this is part 1, I feel like I kind of completed the episode, but I might make a part 2 still. Thanks for listening, guys, and my apologies for my voice, and at the same time for my crackly voice. I don't know what the term is. All I know is that human beings are seeking something beyond themselves and beyond the individual visibly. We have our species, and beyond the species we have galactic and cosmic archetypes to entertain. You know, it's like the person asking themselves, what does my consciousness serve? Like, what am I doing in existence right now? And it's as if the pilot is, it's like the attention is piloting manifestation. And once the pilot has completed the journey, the pilot gets to the destination. The moment the pilot steps out of the airplane, that pilot is no longer a pilot. It's our work. Consciousness is here to discover its advancement. And so, rise, mankind, rise. Thanks for listening, guys. Much blessings and namaste. And if you are, let's say by any chance, like someone from some sort of royal lineage left in humanity, like let's say you're a royal person hearing me, try to wonder about what is the greatest outcome of humanity, and it will definitely be more than, self-service. The world needs great symbols. We need great archetypes, because when we fail, what else is there? I think this is why the idea of God has had a powerful influence on the human mind, right? Imagine you're a king and a king or queen, and you've reached a point where your kingdom is under siege, and your kingdom, like the odds are against you, and the kingdom's like, I have nothing left, and the king or queen looks at the sky, and that's where we realize when we cannot do something alone, the whole universe is there to speak to. We are designed to be part of a great collective system. I think that's just the intelligence of nature. With consciousness comes the responsibility of advancement, and to live for that advancement, to have faith in the advancement of human vision. That's an incredible feeling. Perhaps there will come a time where the species will realize it has always been worthy of its greatness. Much blessings and namaste.